And I can remember thinking on the way home that this can't continue. I can't keep doing this. I mean, I was working like crazy and spending every penny I had on the racing. I've never quit anything in my life. I'll make it through. I think I told my son, the only way I'm not going to finish is if they carry me out on a stretcher. Hi, my name's Tom Russell, and this is my story. Yeah, from when I was very little, my dad drag raced. So I grew up at the races. From the time I was an infant, I was literally going to the races all the time. I quickly got obsessed with cars and race cars and followed my dad around everywhere. And even if he had to move the race car in the garage 10 feet, I'd climb in the car and go with him. I was around that stuff going with him and couldn't wait till I was 16 so I could drive a car. And when I was in school, I played some sports and things like that until I turned 16. And as soon as I got my license, I started racing. I was 16 the first time I ever built a Chevy engine. The first time I ever won a race, I was 16. And I did that for 35 years. In 2022, we went to the Gator Nationals in Florida. I remember complaining when we left. I paid $3.05 a gallon for diesel fuel for our motorhome. And this motorhome holds 100 gallons of fuel, so it was extremely expensive. And we went down there for about a week and a half and raced. And on the way home, diesel fuel went up to $5.25 a gallon. And I can remember thinking on the way home that this can't continue. I can't keep doing this. I mean, I was working like crazy and spending every penny I had on the racing. And I just knew that I couldn't sustain it anymore. Everything was getting so expensive that I just couldn't do it anymore. And when you've done that stuff your entire life, it's like a huge shock when you stop. And I was just really struggling to find direction in my life. I mean, my entire life revolved around race cars, working on them. That's what I was doing for a living. I was building race cars, building engines. I just, all of a sudden didn't have any of that anymore, completely stopped. So I was just like wandering aimlessly, trying to figure out what to do with my life. And I started getting extremely depressed and just didn't know what to do. And it got to the point where I was just mad when I woke up in the morning. I didn't, I even remember saying, praying or saying something to God about, why are you putting me through this? Why do I have to live this life? Which is crazy because I have an amazing wife and amazing kids, but I just couldn't find purpose and had no idea what to do. Along this time somewhere, my son sent me a video of Chad Wright when he was on the Andy Frisella podcast. And I watched it and I really liked some of the things he was saying, so I started searching for his videos, and I found a 3 of 7 podcast that's out of Georgia, and started listening to their videos. And they're Christians, so they'd talk about the God some and talk about the Bible. And I started reading the Bible a little bit here and there, and listening to their stuff. And then I joined their Patreon. And one day in 2000, I think it was 2024, in February, on their podcast, they started talking about a training mission that they do in Georgia. They call the Rite of Passage, the ROP course, ROP. And they were talking about having a few spots left in that. And if somebody wanted to sign up, you could go to the website and sign up. So I don't know what made me do it. I said later it was God that got me to do this, because it's not something that I would have ever done. I mean, I'm not an athlete. I just don't do that stuff. So I went on their website and signed up for it, and figuring I wouldn't get selected for it. But I signed up for it. You have to go on there and tell your story. Probably 2 weeks later, I got an email from 3 of 7 saying that I was selected for it. And so at that time, I told my wife and kids that I had signed up for it, and they thought I was completely crazy. They thought I was having a midlife crisis. And about a week later, I think I got the email, and I had to pay for it, which it was expensive. I really couldn't afford to do it at the time. So I started walking on the treadmill a couple miles every evening, and then started running a little bit on the treadmill, trying to get into shape. We got to probably mid-July, and just everything, if it could go wrong, it did. Just everything in my life. I mean, things were breaking. I was spending huge amounts of money trying to keep things going. Business was slow. I could see that there's just no way I'm going to be able to afford to take the time and make that trip to Georgia. So I told my son and my wife I probably wasn't going to make it, and I knew there was no refund for it, so I was just going to eat that money and forget about it. Well, my son knew how much I was struggling and what I was going through, and he came out to the shop one night and said, "Look, you're going to Georgia." And this is a 20-year-old kid. He helped me get all my stuff together. I had to buy a bunch of stuff to take down there, and had to buy a backpack and all that. I had none of this stuff. I don't hike, or at the time didn't do any of it. So my wife took Friday and Monday off work, and she went with me. We loaded up in the motorhome, and I hooked my Suburban to the back, and we took off for Georgia. And the same thing, on the way down there we had all kinds of problems, and got there just in time. We had a meeting with the 3 of 7 guys on Friday evening at a pavilion just outside of a campground, and I had got a spot in the campground for the motorhome. We had the meeting, and I really didn't even know what this training was going to be. I knew it was 24 hours, but that was about it. I didn't know much about it, but I had heard people talk about it and say how much of a difference it made for them. Well, when I got there to the meeting, they started telling us what was going on. And it was, you move for 24 hours straight through the mountains in North Georgia, no stopping, no sitting down, which doesn't sound that bad, but it's brutal. And they talked about you have to eat and drink all the time. You burn so many calories when you're doing this that they're on you constantly about eating. But these guys are all in excellent shape and athletes, and I'm sitting there thinking, what in the heck am I doing here? I'm not an athlete. I don't belong here. I felt really out of place. I mean, I was one of the oldest guys there. I'd smoked cigarettes most of my life. I just wasn't in the kind of shape that these people were. That evening, I went back to the motorhome and told my wife, I said, I don't know that I can do this. Well, my kids kept asking me before we left, "Are you sure you can do this?" And I kept telling them, "I'll do it. I can do it. I've never quit anything in my life. I'll make it through." I think I told my son, the only way I'm not going to finish is if they carry me out on a stretcher. But I got up the next morning at 3:30 and got a shower and went over to the pavilion, and we sat there and waited. Everybody was up and ready to go at 4. And from there, we loaded up in the vans, drove about 20 or 30 minutes to the trailhead. And when you get out of the van at the trailhead, you move. Nobody stands around. We got straight out of the van and started up the mountain. And I can remember about 15 minutes in, my legs were burning, I was breathing hard, and I'm thinking, there's absolutely no way I can do this for 24 hours straight. And we walked for about 5 hours, and we had to jog on this fire road that had big gravel on it. And I tweaked my knee. Something in my knee popped. I about went down, and it got to hurting so bad that I started limping. Well, when I started doing that, my hips started hurting, my lower back started hurting. I mean, we're 5 hours into a 24-hour hike, and I started thinking, I just can't, there's no way I can continue on with this. I just can't do it. And we were about an hour away from our first resupply, where we'd fill up our water and get more snacks and things like that. Every time I'd think about quitting, I'd think about having to make that call to my kids and tell them that I didn't make it. And I'd actually start crying when I was thinking about that, and so I just kept going. And we got to the first resupply, and I'm just hobbling. And I had another guy on my team, James, that's a professional fisherman, that had a pre-existing knee injury that was the same way. He was just hobbling. Him and I looked like, I mean, we could barely walk. And I found out later the 3-7 guys thought that him and I were going to quit right there. But we didn't. And I can remember Chad Wright, coming up when we were lined up and saying, I know some of you guys are feeling sorry for yourself right now, but you need to nip that right now and just keep moving forward. So we went I think it was another 6 hours, 5 or 6 hours to the next resupply. And I was starting to wonder if was physically capable of finishing this, because like I said, I could barely walk. James and I got right back in line, and I think that resupply was just before dark. So it would have been probably 7 or 8 o'clock at night. And they got us, I remember they got us Bojangles chicken, and they wanted us to eat some real food before we took off. This resupply is the only thing out of this entire course that I regret. We actually had a teammate that decided to quit at that resupply. My two regrets is, one, I didn't talk to him and try to talk him into staying or see what was wrong. And then when you have a teammate quit, they give you a big, it must be a 4x6 piece of lumber that's probably 2 or 3 feet long that says burden on it. And that's your burden for letting one of your teammates quit, not helping them through. And I never, the team has to carry that throughout the rest of the mission. And I never carried that. I mean, I was so injured, they never gave it to me, and I wish I would have carried it for at least a little while. From that point on, I mean, I knew I was going to make it. I knew I wasn't going to quit, but I had no idea. I mean, we still had another 12 hours to go, and I had no idea how hard that was going to be. But my team, this was a group of such amazing people. And at that resupply, Chad had the team take our backpacks because he didn't want us carrying the extra weight. And they were trying to help us get through too. We got to the point where it was probably midnight, and we started through a lot more technical part of the trail. I mean, where there was drop-offs on the side, and we went down behind some waterfalls. And I can remember teammates that were walking behind me, like when there was a drop-off, I could see their arm around the side of me to make sure I didn't fall over the edge. And they were just, the team was amazing. They really took care of us. And I found out later, a lot of the guys on the team said they had thought a lot about quitting, but once they saw how much James and I were struggling and we weren't quitting, that they just couldn't bring themselves to quit. And when it got to like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, you get to the point where you're so exhausted that there was times I was hallucinating. And every time, I mean, we'd be going up mountains that you think it's just never going to end. And we got through, started to get where it was daylight out, and we got through to what I thought was our last, to where we were finished. And we got to the vans, and Chad said, all right, everybody fill up your water and your snacks. And I thought, I can't do this anymore. But we filled everything up, nobody complained. And he walked us back about a quarter mile and had us stop and turn around. And he sent everybody out one at a time and told us, think about what you've learned in the last 24 hours, and then we'd have an after action meeting when we got back to the pavilion. But everybody left except James and I, and I remember Chad saying something like, well, you boys did it. And he said it was a hell of a fight. And James and I, neither one said anything. And I was so emotional at this point. I couldn't even talk. If I'd have started talking, I would have started crying, because it was just the fight that we went through to get through that. And, you know, seeing what you're capable of doing was just overwhelming. But we all got back to the vans, and I had to crawl to get up in the van. I at this point, I could barely walk at all. And then we rode for 30 minutes back to the pavilion, and after sitting for 30 minutes, I literally, they had to help me get out of the van and get over and sit down. I was a mess. But that experience taught me so much and showed me what you can do if you set your mind to it. I mean, early in the hike, you know, your mind and your body start going to war with each other. Your mind's telling you, you got to stop doing this. It's, you know, your mind tries to preserve your body. But the things that you can accomplish when you get control of your mind is just unbelievable. It really restored my hope for humanity. You know, you see all the horrible things going on in the world and you think there's no good people left. But these people, I could call any one of them today, and I guarantee you they'd come and help me do something if I needed it. In the same way, if they called me, I'd be on my way. I sat here at the summit in Dover at the church with Pastor Rob, and he had me talk to the congregation and tell them about what I had went through in Georgia. And him and I have met a couple times for coffee, and I told him what I'd kind of like to do is take people that are struggling with addiction or recovering from substance abuse, veterans struggling, do something like the ROP course. And he suggested that we do like a 12-hour instead of a 24-hour. After him and I met for coffee, my son and I went directly home and started looking up trails in Ohio and looked up the hardest hiking trail in Ohio. And my son and I went and hiked it, and it was 12 hours, about 22 miles. I told Pastor Rob, if I can give people a fraction of what I got out of the ROP course in Georgia, it'll be extremely successful, because it truly did change my life. Right before the trip, I had no direction in my life, had no idea what I was doing, didn't really even want to be alive. I just was tired of everything, had no idea what I was doing. After the trip, it just started me on a path of hope and knowing that I can conquer anything that I set my mind to. And those guys have brought me back to reading the Bible, praying, just trusting in God and His plan for my life. And it's just completely changed my life. I went from dreading waking up in the morning to being excited to get up in the morning and work on all these projects. And you know, I just want to, I've lived my whole life selfish, drag racing. That's all I cared about doing, and now I want to give back. I want to try to do the same thing that they did for me, for other people that are struggling. I can imagine how like a veteran feels after they get out of the military, because that's all they've done for years and years. And you know, when you have something like that taken away from you, it was the same thing with drag racing for me. When you have done nothing but that for 30 years and it's suddenly gone, you're just completely lost. Bringing me back to God has saved my life. It really has. It's probably saved my marriage, my relationship with my kids. It's just completely changed my life.